The cruelest women do not scream at you in public. They smile while slowly teaching everyone else to ignore you. I realized that truth 3 days before Christmas, while standing in my son Daniel's dining room, holding a tray of roasted vegetables nobody had asked me to bring. Snow drifted softly outside the tall windows of their Boston townhouse, while warm jazz music floated through hidden speakers and expensive candles flickered along the center of the table. Everything looked beautiful. Perfect, even. Ava always made sure of that. My daughter-in-law believed presentation could disguise almost anything. At 67, I should have understood women like her better by now. I spent 30 years teaching literature at Northeastern University. I taught entire semesters analyzing manipulation hidden beneath polite dialogue. But life becomes dangerous when loneliness makes you grateful simply to feel included. Margaret, you made too much food again. Ava laughed lightly as she adjusted crystal wine glasses near the kitchen island. Her tone sounded playful enough that nobody else would notice the criticism underneath it. I just thought extra sides might help, I replied softly. Daniel barely looked up from his phone. Mom still thinks we are feeding an army every holiday, he joked. Everyone laughed politely, including me. That was the problem. I laughed too. Lily, my 16-year-old granddaughter, glanced toward me for half a second before lowering her eyes again. Sometimes teenagers notice tensions adults spend years pretending not to see. I placed the tray carefully beside the other dishes while Ava floated gracefully between guests wearing a cream silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly property taxes. She looked elegant in the effortless modern way magazines always celebrate now. Meanwhile, I suddenly became painfully aware of my sensible navy sweater and silver reading glasses resting in my purse beside the entryway. Can you move the potatoes closer to the main table? Ava asked one of the caterers quietly. Main table. The phrase landed strangely in my chest. I turned slowly toward the dining room and realized there were now 2 seating areas. The large candlelit table near the fireplace where Daniel, Ava, their friends, and business associates would sit. Then a smaller round table positioned awkwardly beside the kitchen hallway with only 3 chairs. Mine, Lily's, and Ava's elderly aunt from Connecticut who rarely spoke above a whisper anymore. Oh, I said before I could stop myself. Ava immediately smiled warmly. We thought this setup might feel quieter and more comfortable for you. Comfortable. Women like Ava always weaponize concern. If she openly insulted me, Daniel might notice. But if she framed exclusion as kindness, everyone relaxed into it gratefully. Of course, I replied calmly while folding my coat over the back of the small chair. Across the room, guests admired Ava's holiday decorations while Daniel opened another bottle of expensive wine. Nobody looked cruel. That was what made moments like these so confusing. Families rarely collapse through dramatic explosions at first. They disappear through tiny, repeated humiliations everyone agrees not to name aloud. Dinner moved forward beneath soft golden lighting and carefully curated conversation. Ava controlled the atmosphere effortlessly. She redirected topics whenever discussions drifted toward my old teaching career. She interrupted small stories I tried telling Lily about her grandfather Robert. She laughed every time I forgot some modern celebrity name or misunderstood a social media reference. Always gently, always playfully. Death by 1,000 elegant corrections. At one point, Daniel's business partner complimented the antique silver serving tray near the fireplace. That belonged to my husband, I said automatically. Before I could continue, Ava smiled brightly. Margaret keeps every old thing imaginable. She hates letting go of the past. Everyone chuckled softly again. I smiled too, because by then smiling felt easier than forcing people to acknowledge discomfort. Later that evening, after dessert plates were cleared and snow thickened outside across Beacon Hill, I stood alone near the hallway gathering my gloves. The party noise drifted warmly behind me while Ava approached carrying 2 empty champagne glasses. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned closer just enough for only me to hear her. You always make everything about yourself, she said quietly, still smiling. My fingers froze against the leather gloves in my hands. Behind her, guests laughed loudly near the fireplace while Christmas music played softly through the townhouse speakers. Ava's face remained perfectly pleasant, perfectly calm, as though she had merely commented on the weather. I looked at her for several seconds before answering. That is an interesting thing to say to a woman sitting beside the kitchen. Her smile flickered almost invisibly. Just once. Then Daniel called her name from across the room, and she floated back toward the warm, glowing crowd while I stood alone near the front door, suddenly realizing something cold and irreversible. I was no longer a member of this family center. I had become decoration around the edges of Ava's performance. Families rarely decide together who becomes invisible. Usually one person quietly writes the script, and everyone else learns their lines without noticing. 3 days after Christmas dinner, I woke before sunrise and stood in my kitchen staring at fresh snow covering Beacon Hill like silence laid carefully across the city. The townhouse felt colder lately, though the thermostat remained exactly where Robert always kept it. I wrapped both hands around a coffee mug while replaying Ava's words inside my mind. You always make everything about yourself. The sentence should have angered me more than it did. Instead, it unsettled me because some part of me wondered whether she genuinely believed it. Loneliness makes older women dangerous to themselves sometimes. We begin questioning our own memories simply because nobody else repeats them back to us anymore. Around 9 that morning, Lily texted asking whether she could stop by after school. The request surprised me. Since turning 16, my granddaughter spent most of her time balancing advanced classes, dance rehearsals, and carefully curated teenage friendships online. Of course, I replied immediately. By late afternoon, snow still drifted softly outside, while Lily sat cross-legged on my living room rug drinking hot chocolate beside the fireplace. She scrolled silently through her phone for nearly 10 minutes before finally glancing toward me. "Grandma," she said carefully, "can I show you something weird?" Teenagers always say weird when they really mean painful. I nodded slowly. Lily hesitated before opening a family group chat I had never seen before. My stomach tightened immediately. The title read Core 4 plus Lily. Daniel, Ava, 2 of Ava's closest friends, and Lily, not me. Hundreds of messages filled the screen stretching back nearly 2 years. Holiday planning, dinner reservations, vacation photos, casual conversations. Then the jokes began appearing. Small at first. Ava posting a photograph of me carrying 3 grocery bags beside the caption, "Margaret preparing for the apocalypse again." Laughing emojis followed underneath from everyone except Lily. Another message showed a screenshot from Thanksgiving. Ava zoomed directly on my expression while writing. She looks confused every time someone mentions Instagram. More laughing emojis. My fingers tightened slowly around the coffee mug. Lily watched me carefully. "I never answered most of them," she whispered. I felt bad. But the worst part was not the jokes themselves. It was the pattern hidden underneath them. Every family event included subtle commentary shaping me into a harmless, embarrassing old woman. Forgetful, emotional, socially outdated, difficult. Ava never attacked directly. She curated perception instead. One polished observation at a time. "Your mother started this?" I asked quietly. Lily nodded once. "Dad usually just reacted with emojis because he hates conflict." Of course he did. Daniel inherited Robert's gentleness, but not his courage. There is a difference. I stared into the fireplace while messages blurred together across the glowing phone screen. Suddenly, dozens of confusing moments from the past 3 years rearranged themselves into something recognizable. Why family dinners felt increasingly performative. Why conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Why Ava always spoke for me before I could answer questions myself. She was not simply controlling social situations. She was managing my identity inside the family. "Grandma," Lily asked softly after a long silence. "Are you okay?" I almost lied automatically the way older women often do to keep rooms emotionally comfortable for everyone else. But exhaustion finally outweighed politeness. "No," I answered honestly. "I do not think I am." Snow tapped quietly against the living room windows while Lily moved beside me on the couch. "I think Mom is jealous of you," she admitted carefully. I looked toward her in surprise. "Jealous?" Lily nodded slowly. "People always listen to you differently, even when you are quiet." The observation startled me because teenagers often understand emotional dynamics adults spend years avoiding. I leaned back against the couch cushions, remembering who I used to be before widowhood shrank my world smaller and smaller. Before grief turned me grateful merely to receive invitations into rooms I once naturally belonged inside. "Your mother and I used to get along very well," I said eventually. Lily gave me a sad little smile. I think that was before she realized you were not becoming weaker as fast as she expected. The sentence landed heavily between us. Outside, Boston disappeared beneath thick winter snowfall while the fireplace crackled softly against the darkening room. I suddenly understood something deeply uncomfortable. Ava did not want me gone because she hated me. She wanted me smaller because my existence reminded her that she still felt threatened. And for the first time since Robert died, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining the tension inside this family. I was not imagining it at all. I had simply been the last person willing to name it. There is something uniquely painful about realizing strangers online know a happier version of your family than the one you actually live inside. The week after Lily showed me the group chat, I made the mistake of opening Ava's social media page late one evening while eating soup alone in my kitchen. Snow pressed softly against the windows, and the old radiator beside the dining table hissed with uneven warmth the way it always had during Boston winters. I should have gone to bed earlier. Instead, I sat there beneath the yellow kitchen lights, scrolling through photographs that felt both familiar and strangely fictional at the same time. Ava had posted a glossy holiday album titled Christmas with my favorite people. In the first photograph, Daniel stood beside the enormous tree wearing a dark green sweater, while Ava leaned elegantly against his shoulder, holding a champagne glass. Lily smiled between them in cream-colored silk pajamas. Every image glowed with warmth. Golden candlelight, expensive wine bottles, perfect wrapping paper beneath the tree. The comments underneath flooded with admiration. Beautiful family. Holiday goals. You all look so happy together. I studied each photograph slowly. Then I noticed something strange. I was not in any of them. Not one. My stomach tightened immediately because I remembered standing in that living room nearly the entire evening. I remembered helping arrange desserts. I remembered Lily showing me her dance recital photographs beside the fireplace. I remembered handing Ava the silver serving tray that once belonged to Robert's mother. Yet online, I no longer existed inside the event at all. At first, I tried convincing myself it was accidental. Maybe I stepped away whenever photographs were taken. Maybe Ava simply forgot. But then I continued scrolling backward through older albums. Thanksgiving in Vermont. Summer weekend in Maine. Lily's birthday brunch. Charity gala photos. In every collection, I appeared either partially cropped at the edge or not included whatsoever. Once you notice a pattern, you cannot unsee it again. I closed the phone slowly and stared across the kitchen toward the empty chair where Robert used to read newspapers after dinner. She erased me. I whispered aloud before realizing how dramatic the sentence sounded in an otherwise silent room. But it was true. Ava had not removed me loudly. She had curated me out gradually until even digital memory cooperated with the illusion. The next afternoon, I met my old colleague Eleanor for coffee near Copley Square. Eleanor wore oversized wool scarves regardless of weather and still spoke with the sharp confidence that once terrified undergraduate students. During faculty meetings, "You look tired," she observed immediately after sitting down. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly before answering. Do you ever feel like people rewrite your role in your own life while you are still alive to watch it happen? Eleanor blinked once before leaning back thoughtfully. That is either the beginning of a psychological breakdown or an excellent memoir. Despite myself, I laughed softly. Then I told her everything. The side table at Christmas, the group chat, the photographs, Ava's comments disguised as concern. Eleanor listened without interrupting once. When I finally stopped speaking, she remained quiet for several seconds. "Margaret," she said carefully, "why are you acting surprised that insecurity behaves competitively?" I frowned slightly. Ava is not insecure. Eleanor nearly choked on her coffee. Please. Beautiful, polished women are often the most insecure people in the room. They simply package it better. Outside, pedestrians hurried through dirty snowbanks while gray winter light reflected across the cafe windows. Eleanor folded her hands together thoughtfully before continuing. You spent decades being respected professionally. Students admired you. Robert adored you publicly. People listened when you spoke. Women like Ava noticed those things even when you were trying to shrink yourself. The sentence unsettled me because part of me still believed widowhood had made me smaller automatically. Invisible. Irrelevant. Eleanor shook her head as if reading my thoughts. Loneliness changed your confidence, Margaret. It did not erase your presence. Later that evening, I returned home carrying groceries through icy Beacon Hill sidewalks, while Ava's polished photographs lingered stubbornly inside my mind. Once inside the townhouse, I paused beside the hallway mirror and studied my reflection carefully. Silver hair pinned neatly back, navy wool coat dusted with snowflakes, fine lines deepened by grief and winter exhaustion. I looked older than the woman Ava first met 15 years ago. Softer too. But suddenly I understood something important. Ava's power depended entirely on my willingness to disappear quietly. Every cropped photograph, every patronizing joke, every smaller chair near the kitchen. It only worked because I kept accepting the edited version of myself she presented to the world. And for the first time in years, I found myself wondering what might happen if I stopped cooperating with the performance altogether. The most dangerous kind of humiliation is the kind performed so politely that everyone watching feels unreasonable for noticing it. 2 weeks after Christmas, Ava hosted what she called a small girls' brunch at the townhouse for Lily and several of her school friends before winter formal season began. She invited me too, though the invitation arrived through Daniel in the form of a casual afterthought. "Mom, Ava said you should stop by if you want," he mentioned during a phone call while distractedly answering emails. "If you want. Now we would love to see you." Not Lily asked for you specifically. Just polite enough to avoid looking cruel. Still, I agreed to come because loneliness trains older women to accept scraps as though they are generosity. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in freezing rain and gray skies. I spent extra time choosing what to wear before finally settling on a soft blue sweater Robert once said matched my eyes. I even curled my hair slightly, which felt ridiculous at my age until I realized something painful. I still wanted approval inside my own family. The townhouse smelled like cinnamon pastries and expensive candles when I arrived. Lily greeted me warmly near the staircase, but Ava barely glanced up from arranging flowers in crystal vases across the kitchen island. "Margaret, thank goodness," she said lightly. "Could you help move the extra chairs from the basement?" Not hello. Not you look nice. Straight to usefulness. I nodded calmly anyway, and carried folding chairs upstairs one careful trip at a time, while Ava floated elegantly through the dining room, directing caterers and adjusting decorations. By noon, 6 teenage girls filled the house with perfume, laughter, and winter coats scattered carelessly across furniture. I stayed mostly near the kitchen preparing tea trays and warming pastries, because somehow that role always became mine automatically now. At one point, I overheard one of Lily's friends compliment the framed black and white photograph near the fireplace. "That was my grandfather's publishing company opening in 1987, Lily explained proudly. "My grandma used to teach literature at Northeastern." Before I could respond, Ava laughed softly while pouring champagne into crystal glasses for the adults. "Margaret still talks about those university years constantly," she said playfully. "We tease her that she retired but never emotionally left campus." The girls smiled politely because teenagers sense when adults expect laughter even if they do not understand the joke fully. I smiled too, though something cold tightened slowly inside my chest again. Later that afternoon, while guests gathered upstairs helping Lily choose dresses for winter formal photos, I remained downstairs alone, cleaning serving plates nobody asked me to wash. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows overlooking the narrow Beacon Hill street, while soft music drifted faintly from the second floor. Then I heard voices near the staircase. Ava and 2 mothers from Lily's school stood just beyond the hallway discussing colleges and family schedules. "You are lucky your mother-in-law lives nearby," one woman remarked casually. "Built-in family support." Ava laughed quietly. "Sometimes support, sometimes supervision." The women chuckled politely. "Margaret means well," Ava continued in that same elegant, harmless tone. "But older women struggle when they are no longer the center of everything." My hands froze beneath warm dishwater. "She still treats Daniel like he is 20 years old," Ava added lightly. "Honestly, sometimes I feel like there are 3 people in my marriage." More soft laughter followed. I stared silently at the kitchen sink while rain streaked slowly down the windows beside me. The thing about passive cruelty is that it depends entirely on plausible deniability. If confronted, Ava could easily insist she was joking. Sensitive. Misunderstood. Taken out of context. Yet the damage still settled quietly into every room afterward. A few minutes later, Lily appeared downstairs, looking pale and uncomfortable. "Grandma, She asked softly after the other women moved away. Are you okay? I dried my hands carefully on a dish towel before turning toward her. Why would you ask that? Lily hesitated. Because Mom talks about you differently when you are not around. Children often say truths adults spend years decorating with softer language. I studied my granddaughter carefully, then noticed something else beneath her discomfort. Embarrassment. Not toward me. Toward her mother. Does it happen often? I asked quietly. Lily looked down immediately. More than you think. The rain outside thickened while distant traffic moved slowly through icy Boston streets. Upstairs, teenage girls laughed loudly over dresses and photographs, while downstairs, I suddenly understood the full shape of my role inside Ava's carefully managed world. I was not family in the way she viewed herself as family. I was a lingering presence from another era. A reminder that Daniel loved someone before her. A woman whose history inside this family could never fully be replaced no matter how perfectly Ava arranged every holiday table. And perhaps that was exactly why she spent so much energy trying to shrink me into something smaller, quieter, and easier to step around. Widowhood does something strange to women after 60. The world slowly stops asking who you are and starts asking only whether you need help carrying groceries. By February, I realized I had spent nearly 3 years living inside that smaller version of myself without questioning it. Robert died during a brutal snowstorm that shut down half of Boston for 2 days. After the funeral, people filled my house with casseroles, sympathy cards, and gentle voices for several weeks. Then life continued moving forward for everyone except me. Daniel buried himself in work. Lily grew older. Ava perfected her role as the center of the family. And I quietly disappeared into routines small enough not to inconvenience anyone. But after everything Lily showed me, after the photographs and the jokes and the careful humiliations hidden beneath politeness, something inside me refused to remain asleep any longer. One freezing Thursday afternoon, I found myself standing outside the Boston Public Library staring up at the old stone building where I once delivered lectures during literary conferences years earlier. Snow covered the steps in soft gray layers while businessmen hurried past carrying coffee cups and expensive leather briefcases. For nearly 10 minutes, I considered turning around and driving home. What exactly was I doing there? I had not attended a public academic event since Robert's memorial service. But then I remembered something Eleanor told me over coffee. You are acting like your life already ended simply because other people became more comfortable when you got quieter. The sentence irritated me precisely because it was true. Inside the library, warm air and the scent of old paper wrapped around me instantly. A small nonprofit literacy organization was hosting a fundraising luncheon for urban reading programs, and Eleanor had insisted I attend after discovering my name still appeared on one of the founding donor lists from nearly 20 years earlier. The ballroom buzzed softly with conversation beneath crystal chandeliers, while servers carried trays of sparkling water between tables dressed in white linen. I suddenly felt ancient standing there alone in my navy wool coat among younger professionals discussing publishing trends and educational grants. Then someone called my name. Professor Whitmore? I turned to find a woman in her 40s hurrying toward me with unmistakable excitement brightening her face. You taught my American literature seminar in 1998, she said breathlessly. I still remember your lecture about female authors surviving social invisibility. I blinked in surprise while she laughed warmly. You changed my life, she added simply. Before I could respond, another former student approached. Then another. Within half an hour, 3 different people had asked for photographs with me while discussing books, university memories, and scholarship programs we once worked on together. It felt deeply disorienting hearing my voice fill rooms confidently again after years of shrinking conversations down to weather forecasts and holiday schedules. During lunch, Eleanor leaned toward me with a smug expression. Interesting, she murmured quietly. You do not look invisible from where I am sitting. I laughed despite myself. Across the ballroom, wealthy donors and local journalists circulated between tables while soft piano music drifted through the room. For the first time since Robert died, I remembered something uncomfortable but necessary. Before grief reduced me into someone grateful merely to be tolerated, I had once been deeply respected. Not because I hosted perfect dinners or posted curated photographs online. Because I possessed substance, intelligence, presence. Late that afternoon, after the luncheon ended, I stopped at a small bookstore near Beacon Street before driving home. While browsing near the history section, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. Ava. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. Margaret, she said lightly, though I detected tension beneath the polished tone immediately. Daniel mentioned you were at some literacy event today. Some literacy event. Interesting how women reveal insecurity through minimization. Yes, I answered calmly. It was lovely. A pause followed. Well, Ava continued carefully, I hope you are not exhausting yourself socially. You seemed overwhelmed during Christmas. There it was again. The subtle rewriting. The careful positioning of me as fragile. I ran my fingers slowly across the spine of a hardcover novel before responding. Actually, I felt more like myself today than I have in years. Silence. Not long. Just enough to matter. That is wonderful, Ava replied smoothly, though her voice cooled almost invisibly around the edges. After we ended the call, I stood quietly between bookstore shelves while snow drifted outside the windows across Beacon Hill. Suddenly, I understood why Ava worked so carefully to reduce me into harmless background decoration inside the family. A confident older woman unsettles people who built their identity around replacing her. And perhaps for the first time since Robert died, I no longer wanted to make myself smaller just so everyone else could remain comfortable. People reveal who they are most. Honestly, when they realize they are no longer controlling the room. By late February, Boston had entered that strange in-between season where winter still clung stubbornly to the streets even while the sunlight stayed a little longer each evening. Snowbanks melted into dirty piles beside sidewalks, and everyone walked through the city carrying exhaustion from months of cold weather. Ava, meanwhile, remained flawless. She hosted brunches, organized charity boards, posted polished photographs online beside captions about gratitude and family balance. If strangers watched her life from a distance, they would assume she possessed effortless emotional intelligence. That was the frightening thing about women like Ava. Their cruelty never looked cruel from far away. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel called while I was reorganizing old books in Robert's study. Mom, he said distractedly, are you attending the Winter Arts Preservation Gala next weekend? I paused immediately because I had completely forgotten about the event. Robert and I donated to that organization for nearly 15 years before his death. I received an invitation, I answered carefully. Why? A brief silence followed. Ava is helping coordinate seating arrangements, Daniel explained. She mentioned you probably would not feel comfortable with such a large crowd. I smiled slowly to myself despite the irritation rising in my chest. There it was again. Ava deciding my comfort on my behalf before anyone even asked me directly. Actually, I replied calmly while sliding another hardcover novel onto the shelf. I think I would enjoy going very much. Daniel sounded surprised. Really? Yes, I answered simply. Really? The gala took place inside one of Boston's oldest luxury hotels overlooking Copley Square. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across marble floors while string music floated softly through crowded ballrooms filled with politicians, academics, donors, and wealthy couples dressed in black tie elegance. I arrived alone, wearing a long black dress Robert once bought me for a university fundraiser in New York nearly a decade earlier. At first, insecurity followed me through the lobby. Like an unwanted shadow, everyone seemed younger, sharper, more socially effortless. Then something unexpected happened. The moment I entered the ballroom, an older man near the donor tables stared toward me in surprise before smiling broadly. Margaret Whitmore, he called loudly across the room. Within minutes, several people approached me one after another. Former colleagues, publishing executives, board members from literacy foundations Robert and I once supported together. One woman even hugged me warmly while saying, Boston academic circles still talk about your education reform speeches. Across the ballroom, I spotted Ava frozen beside the champagne tower holding a clipboard against her silver gown. Her expression remained perfectly composed for everyone watching, but I noticed the slight tightening around her mouth immediately. She had expected me to arrive quietly, briefly, politely. Instead, people kept pulling me into conversations she could not control. At one point, a photographer approached our group asking for pictures beside the donor wall. Mrs. Whitmore should stand in the center. One organizer insisted enthusiastically. Her family helped fund half these scholarship programs. Ava arrived beside us almost instantly, smiling elegantly. Margaret prefers smaller moments. She interrupted lightly. Too much attention overwhelms her. Before I could answer, the organizer laughed warmly. Not the Margaret Whitmore I remember. Several people around us smiled in agreement. The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt enormous. Ava adjusted her bracelet slowly while the photographer positioned everyone beneath the chandelier. For the first time since Robert died, I watched someone challenge Ava's carefully constructed narrative publicly without even realizing they were doing it. Later that evening during dinner service, I sat between a retired university dean and a local columnist discussing public education funding while Ava circulated across the ballroom greeting donors. Every few minutes, I caught her glancing toward our table. Not angry exactly. Unsettled. Because power shifts become visible fastest inside social spaces. The dean beside me eventually leaned closer and asked quietly, "You and your daughter-in-law seem very different." I almost laughed into my wine glass. "That is one way of describing it," I replied. He smiled politely before adding something that stayed with me long after the gala ended. Women who build identity around performance become uncomfortable near women who no longer need one. Around 11 o'clock, snow began falling again outside the ballroom windows while guests gathered coats and called waiting drivers. Ava approached me near the entrance while attendants helped people into expensive winter jackets. "You seem busy tonight," she said smoothly. "I forgot how many people still knew you socially." I buttoned my coat slowly before meeting her eyes. "I think perhaps you forgot there was a version of me before widowhood." For a moment, neither of us smiled. Then Ava tilted her head slightly and said something very quiet beneath the sound of the orchestra packing equipment nearby. "You are changing lately." I looked toward the snowy Boston streets beyond the hotel doors before answering calmly. "No, Ava. I think I am simply becoming visible again." Silence inside families is dangerous because people mistake it for peace when often it is simply exhaustion. 2 days after the gala, Daniel arrived at my townhouse unexpectedly just after sunset carrying takeout containers from the Italian restaurant Robert used to love near Hanover Street. Snow melted slowly from his coat shoulders while he stood awkwardly inside the doorway like a man unsure whether he still belonged in his childhood home. "I thought maybe you had not eaten," he said quietly. I stepped aside without answering immediately because something about his face looked different. Less distracted. Less automatic. We ate dinner in the kitchen beside the radiator while freezing rain tapped softly against the windows. For nearly 20 minutes, Daniel mostly discussed work, new investors, travel schedules, economic forecasts. Men often hide behind practical conversations when emotional honesty frightens them. Then finally he set down his fork and looked toward me carefully. "Mom," he said slowly. "Ava mentioned something strange after the gala." I folded my napkin calmly in my lap. "What was that?" Daniel hesitated. "She said you were acting different lately. More social. More involved." I almost smiled. Imagine describing a widow rediscovering her own personality as suspicious behavior. "Perhaps I became tired of disappearing," I replied quietly. Daniel frowned slightly. "You were never disappearing." The sadness that moved through me then felt almost physical because my son genuinely believed that statement. "Daniel," I asked softly, "when was the last time you invited me somewhere without Ava organizing it first?" He opened his mouth immediately, then stopped. Silence settled heavily across the kitchen. Outside, headlights moved slowly through icy Boston streets while the old townhouse creaked softly around us. "That is not fair," he said eventually, though his voice lacked conviction now. "Is it not?" I asked gently. Daniel leaned back in his chair while rubbing tiredly at his forehead. "Mom, Ava tries very hard to keep everyone together." I stared at him carefully, then realized something painful. My son genuinely experienced Ava as peacekeeping rather than controlling because her manipulation always arrived packaged as emotional organization. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you know the difference between harmony and management?" He looked confused immediately. "What?" "Harmony allows everyone to remain fully themselves," I answered. "Management requires someone becoming smaller so another person can feel comfortable." The room went quiet again after that. Daniel stared down at his untouched wine glass while tension slowly crossed his face in waves. I recognized the expression immediately because I wore it myself weeks earlier after Lily showed me the group chat. It was the look people get when old memories begin rearranging themselves into new meanings. Lily said something odd recently too, he admitted carefully. She asked why we always joke about you being difficult. My chest tightened slightly, though I kept my voice calm. And what did you tell her? Daniel swallowed hard before answering. I told her we were teasing. Teasing. Another elegant word people use when cruelty feels socially inconvenient to acknowledge directly. Did you ever notice I never teased Ava back? I asked quietly. He frowned slightly. I guess not. That is because only one person in those conversations was expected to absorb the humiliation politely. Rain streaked slowly down the kitchen windows while the radiator hissed unevenly beside us. Daniel looked exhausted suddenly, as though invisible weight had settled across his shoulders all at once. I never meant to hurt you, he whispered eventually. I believed him. That was the tragedy. Cruel families are easier to escape than careless ones because at least cruelty announces itself honestly. Carelessness hides behind busyness and good intentions until damage feels almost accidental. I know, I replied softly. But absence still hurts even when nobody intended it. Daniel stared across the kitchen toward Robert's old coat, still hanging beside the hallway closet. Dad would hate this, he murmured quietly. I followed his gaze toward the coat too. Your father noticed people carefully, I answered. That was his gift. Another silence passed between us. Then Daniel finally asked the question I think he had been avoiding for months without realizing it. Do you hate Ava? I almost laughed at how simple men believe emotional conflict should be. No, I said honestly. I think Ava is deeply afraid. He looked genuinely surprised. Afraid of what? I folded my hands together slowly before answering. Afraid that love inside families works like territory instead of connection. Daniel leaned back heavily against the chair while absorbing that thought. She always says she feels judged by you. The statement startled me enough that I blinked. Judged? He nodded. She says you make her feel temporary somehow. Outside, freezing rain thickened against the dark Boston streets while the kitchen glowed softly beneath yellow overhead lights. Suddenly something uncomfortable became clear. Ava had spent years trying to shrink me because my history inside this family reminded her that not every kind of love can be replaced through performance. And perhaps for the first time, Daniel was finally beginning to understand that silence inside a marriage does not always mean balance. Sometimes it simply means one person slowly surrendered their voice to keep everyone else comfortable. The most devastating arguments are not the loud ones. They are the quiet conversations where everyone finally stops pretending. Early March arrived with freezing rain and dirty snow melting along the edges of Boston sidewalks. Winter always makes families feel more trapped somehow. Too many dinners indoors. Too much silence echoing through warm rooms. Daniel invited me to dinner that Sunday evening with unusual insistence in his voice. Mom, please come, he said carefully over the phone. I think we should all spend time together. Spend time together. Men always choose vague language when they are hoping conflict resolves itself politely without requiring courage from anyone involved. Still, I agreed. The townhouse glowed warmly when I arrived just after 6. Candlelight reflected across polished wood floors while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. Ava opened the front door wearing a cream cashmere sweater and that same composed smile she used whenever guests arrived. Margaret, she said smoothly, you look lovely tonight. I thanked her calmly while removing my coat. Lily hugged me tightly near the staircase, and Daniel kissed my cheek before returning immediately to opening wine bottles in the kitchen. Everyone behaved carefully. That was the first sign something important was waiting beneath the surface. Dinner began almost peacefully. Ava served rosemary chicken with roasted vegetables while discussing Lily's upcoming college visits. Daniel talked about work travel. I contributed small comments where appropriate while watching the rain streak softly down the windows overlooking Beacon Hill. Then halfway through dessert, Lily accidentally shifted the entire evening with one innocent sentence. Grandma spoke at a literacy fundraiser last month, she said proudly while reaching for tea. People were lining up to talk to her afterward. Ava's fork paused briefly against her plate. Yes, she replied carefully. Margaret has become very social lately. The wording sounded harmless enough, but Daniel noticed it this time. I saw the recognition flash quietly across his face. Why do you say that like it is strange? He asked suddenly. The room went still immediately. Ava blinked once before laughing softly. I did not mean anything negative. Daniel remained calm, but his voice carried something firmer underneath now. You always frame Mom like she is fragile or difficult whenever people compliment her. Silence spread slowly across the dining room while rain tapped against the windows and candle flames flickered gently between us. Ava set down her wine glass carefully. That is unfair. Is it? Daniel asked quietly. I watched Ava study him with genuine surprise, because I do not think she expected resistance from him publicly. Not after years of automatic agreement. I have spent years trying to keep this family balanced, she answered. Balanced. I repeated softly before I could stop myself. Ava turned toward me immediately. Yes, Margaret. Balanced. The word lingered heavily between us. Then something inside me finally became too exhausted to remain polite. I folded my napkin carefully beside my dessert plate and looked directly at Ava for the first time all evening. You know, I said calmly, I spent a long time believing I was becoming overly sensitive after Robert died. Nobody moved. I told myself the smaller table at Christmas meant nothing. The photographs where I disappeared meant nothing. The jokes in the group chat meant nothing. Ava's face drained slightly of color while Daniel stared toward her in confusion. What group chat? He asked quietly. Lily looked down immediately. Ava recovered quickly, of course. She always did. Margaret, honestly, people joke privately sometimes. You are taking harmless things personally. Harmless. Such a convenient word. I nodded slowly. Perhaps, I replied. But I think people only call humiliation harmless when they are not the person being reduced by it. The room fell silent again. No shouting. No dramatic scene. Just truth sitting heavily in expensive dining room air. Daniel looked genuinely shaken now. Ava, he said carefully, did you really make jokes about Mom with your friends? Ava exhaled sharply. Oh my God, Daniel, everyone vents sometimes. Your mother judges everything I do. I almost laughed softly at that because suddenly the entire situation became painfully clear. No, I answered calmly. I think my existence judged you all by itself. Ava stared at me as though I had slapped her. Not because the words were cruel, but because they were accurate. You always acted like I was competing with you, she whispered tightly. I met her eyes steadily across the candlelit table. That is because you were. Rain poured harder outside now, while Lily sat frozen beside the staircase entrance, and Daniel looked between both of us like a man realizing his marriage and childhood had been quietly speaking two different emotional languages for years. Ava looked down at her untouched dessert plate before speaking again, this time without the polished performance she usually wore so carefully. I was tired of feeling like Daniel loved your approval more than he loved me. There was at last. Not hatred. Not cruelty. Fear. Fear disguised as control for so many years it eventually became personality. I leaned back slowly in my chair while the candles flickered between us. Ava, I said softly, love inside a family was never something you needed to win. And for the first time since I met her 15 years earlier, my daughter-in-law looked less like an enemy and more like a woman exhausted from fighting a war no one else realized she had started. Some women spend years trying to become irreplaceable only to discover that real connection was never something performance could secure in the first place. After the dinner confrontation, the family did not explode dramatically the way movies always pretend people do. Nobody packed suitcases overnight. Nobody screamed across front lawns. Real emotional damage settles more quietly than that. For several weeks afterward, everything inside the family felt strangely fragile, like thin ice across the Charles River at the end of winter. Daniel called me more often now, though guilt lingered heavily beneath every conversation. Lily visited almost every weekend, sometimes bringing coffee and sitting silently beside me while pretending to study for school. Ava, however, became distant in an entirely different way. Not cold exactly. Careful, like someone walking through unfamiliar territory after realizing the map they trusted was wrong. One rainy afternoon near the end of March, she surprised me by appearing alone at my townhouse carrying a small white bakery box from the Italian pastry shop near Hanover Street. I opened the front door expecting Daniel or Lily and nearly froze when I saw her standing there beneath a gray umbrella. I was nearby, she said awkwardly. It was an obvious lie. Nobody is accidentally nearby Beacon Hill during cold spring rain carrying fresh cannoli. Still, I stepped aside quietly and let her enter. The house smelled faintly like old books and chamomile tea while rain tapped softly against the windows. Ava removed her coat slowly before glancing around the living room almost nervously. "I forgot how much this place still feels like Robert," she murmured. The comment surprised me because Ava rarely mentioned my husband directly. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while untouched pastries rested between us on the table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke much. Then finally Ava looked down at her hands and asked something so unexpectedly honest it unsettled me immediately. "Was I terrible to you?" Women rarely ask questions they are fully prepared to hear, answered truthfully. I stirred cream slowly into my coffee before replying. "Not always." Ava nodded slightly as though she already knew that. "I think I kept waiting for you to stop mattering," she admitted quietly. Rain continued falling outside, while soft afternoon light dimmed across the kitchen walls. "And when you did not," she continued, "I started resenting you for it." I studied her carefully then. Without perfect makeup and polished social performance, Ava suddenly looked younger and far more exhausted than I had ever noticed before. "Why?" I asked gently. She gave a sad little laugh without humor. "Because Daniel loved you so easily." The simplicity of the answer almost broke my heart. "Ava," I said softly, "a son loving his mother was never proof he could not love you too." Her eyes filled briefly with tears she seemed embarrassed by immediately. "You make it sound simple." "No," I replied calmly. "I think insecurity complicated something that was always simple." Silence settled between us again while the rain softened outside into mist against the windows. Finally, Ava looked toward me with genuine vulnerability for the first time since I met her 15 years earlier. "I do not know how to fix this," she whispered. I leaned back carefully in my chair before answering. "Perhaps you stopped trying to win relationships that were never competitions." She stared at me quietly, then nodded once. "Not because everything was magically healed. It was not. Some wounds inside families leave permanent tenderness even after forgiveness arrives. But understanding had finally entered the room where performance used to live. By April, winter began loosening its grip on Boston. Small flowers appeared beside brownstone staircases while sunlight stretched longer across the city each evening. Life inside the family slowly changed too. Daniel started inviting me places directly instead of through Ava. Lily asked me to help edit her college essays. Ava stopped speaking for me during conversations. Tiny shifts. Quiet ones. But meaningful. One Sunday afternoon, the four of us walked together through Boston Common while cold spring wind moved through the trees. At one point, Lily ran ahead toward a food cart while Daniel followed behind her, laughing about something I could not hear clearly. Ava and I remained several steps behind them in unusual silence. Then she glanced toward me carefully. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think confidence disappeared with age." I smiled faintly while watching sunlight reflect across the pond ahead of us. "No," I answered softly. "Sometimes it simply becomes quieter." She absorbed that thought silently while people passed around us carrying coffee cups and spring jackets through the park. For years, I believed surviving family tension meant enduring it politely until everyone else felt comfortable again. But standing there beneath pale April sunlight beside the woman who once spent years trying to reduce me, I finally understood something different. Visibility is not selfishness. Presence is not competition. And older women do not need permission to continue mattering simply because younger people grow uncomfortable beside their history, their intelligence, or their emotional permanence. Some stories end with revenge. Mine ended with something far more difficult. I stopped agreeing to disappear.